Hello, everyone, and welcome to Quiz and Hers, the podcast where we test each other's knowledge and the strength of our relationship. I am Hallie, and I'm here with my fiance, Justin.
Hello.
I now have a lead.
Yes, you do.
2-0.
Correct.
For anyone who's new to the podcast, the way it works is that one person asks the other person 6 questions from 6 different categories that are tied together by a common theme.
Well, you're just jumping right in today.
What do you want me to say?
I don't know. Go for it.
What do we normally say?
I don't know.
Would you like to say something?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
I'm not done.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, the 6 categories are arts and literature, sounds and screens, times and places, sports and games, don't tell me, science, and everything else. And basically, they're tied together with a common theme. I'll ask Justin the 6 questions. We'll see how he does, and then I'll talk a little bit about each one.
Yep.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Is there anything you would like to say?
I meant to say this last episode, but now that we're back from our holiday break, whatever you celebrate, if anything, listeners, we hope you had a good one.
Yep.
Okay.
We did.
Should have said that in the last one. Oh, well.
That's okay.
All right. What do we got?
All right, let's go. So, I call today's game, I Have a Dream.
Okay.
And I call it that in honor of today being the birthday and national holiday of Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay. Nice.
Yep. So, wrote the theme around partially Martin Luther King Jr. and partially just interesting African Americans, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So, like, Black History Month, even though that's February technically. But
right, that's not for a couple weeks yet, but okay.
Yeah, that's the theme.
Okay.
It's not just about Martin Luther King. It's mostly not.
Okay.
There are a lot of good people out there, so.
Yes.
Figured we would honor them all.
Okay, cool.
Starting with Martin Luther King.
Cool.
Okay, so, first question is times and places. What civil rights organization, originally called Negro Leaders Conference on Nonviolent Integration, was founded in 1957 after King invited 60 black ministers and leaders to meet in Ebenezer Church in Atlanta?
It's got to be the NAACP, right?
Is that your guess?
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
It is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Oh, the other one. Yep, okay.
Yeah. The NAACP was not started by Martin Luther King.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So, the first meeting at Ebenezer Church in Atlanta was planned after the Montgomery bus boycott victory.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to calling the meeting, King met with other civil rights leaders, including Bayard Rustin and Ella Baker. Before this, Rustin had thought to start something similar in New York City and had asked C.K. Steele, a preacher and civil rights activist, to take the lead role. But Steele didn't want to do it himself, I guess. But he agreed to help out with the effort if King would take the lead in Montgomery.
Okay.
So the purpose of the organization they were working to create was to coordinate and support nonviolent actions to desegregate buses in the South. As you may know, the buses were segregated. Rosa Parks,
yep.
She was supposed to sit in the back, and she didn't think that was fair, and she stood up for it, and that kind of sparked this whole thing.
Yep.
So the group had another meeting a month later in New Orleans, and they made the organization official as the Negro Leaders Conference on Nonviolent Integration. They then changed the name to Southern Negro Leaders Conference, and finally to Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is what it's called.
Right.
They also expanded their goals from bus desegregation to general desegregation.
Yep.
They established their first office in Atlanta with Ella Baker as their first and only staff member at the time. Yeah. So the SCLC actually drew inspiration from the evangelist Billy Graham, and even though Graham associated himself with segregationists, he privately advised the SCLC.
That's weird.
It's very weird.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of things I read about, like, Martin Luther King kind of, like, looking up to him and...
Despite the fact that he was a segregationist?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess he was publicly a segregationist, but he privately was helping them, and King didn't mind. I don't know.
It's odd. Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. Also, not surprisingly, the police, the White Citizens Council, and the KKK tried to repress the SCLC.
Yep.
The few churches that associated themselves with SCLC had to deal with things like arson and bombings. And because of this, even black community leaders opposed the SCLC and said that segregation issues should only be dealt with in the courts.
Oh, I see.
So they didn't really approve of this outside
activism. Yeah.
Exactly. In 1961, the SCLC helped rescue the citizenship schools after Tennessee revoked their charter. Citizenship schools were started in 1954 to teach adults to read so that they could pass literacy tests for voter registration, open checking accounts, and fill out driver's license exams.
Okay.
So when the SCLC rescued them, they started to teach democracy and civil rights, as well as tactics for resistance and community leadership and organizing.
Okay.
So they kind of saved them and then used them as a way to just help bring more people into the fold.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So the SCLC's first major nonviolent campaign was the Albany Movement in Albany, Georgia. It was believed to be largely unsuccessful since not many changes happened afterwards. Their next campaign in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 was considered to be much more successful. Rather than focusing on complete desegregation, they just focused on desegregating the merchants in downtown Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
And on May 2nd, over 1,000 black children in Birmingham left school to join the demonstrations, and they were met with police dogs and high-pressure fire hoses.
Oh, yeah, I've seen the pictures of this.
Yeah, so basically, like, after seeing this on the news, you know, so many people in the U.S. were outraged, and then the Kennedy administration basically intervened immediately and desegregated the businesses there because, you know, people were not happy, obviously.
Yeah.
So after this success, the SCLC decided to march on Washington, D.C. to push for new civil rights legislation. Sorry. It was planned for July 2nd, 1963, and was a huge success with 200 to 300,000 participants and no violence.
Yep.
And this was when King made the famous I Have a Dream speech.
Right.
Yep. In 1964, after an illegal injunction blocking voter registration and civil rights in Selma, Alabama, the Dallas County Voters League reached out to the SCLC to help. There were a lot of nonviolent mass marches, and the jails were filling up with arrested protesters, and even King was arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On March 7th, almost 600 protesters marched and were attacked by state troopers and other policemen using tear gas, clubs, and bullwhips. And again, the news coverage was causing public outrage, and it came to be known as Bloody Sunday.
Right.
Yeah, and within 5 months, President Lyndon B. Johnson responded to the public pressure with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibits racial discrimination in voting. It's a big deal.
Yep. I mean, the 15th Amendment was supposed to do that.
Right. I know. It's stupid that they needed another thing, but...
Yeah.
But, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they did. And after King was assassinated in 1968, Ralph Abernathy took over as president of the SCLC. And the organization still exists today and has recently focused on racial profiling and prisoners' rights.
Makes sense.
So they're still working, you know, today to improve things for African Americans.
Good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Ready for question 2?
Yep.
All right. Sounds and screens. What musical genre that developed in African American communities in the 1870s and which includes the song Swanee River was one of the precursors to rock and roll?
Okay. Swanee River, yeah, so... Blues?
No, that's another one.
Okay, what is it?
It is boogie woogie.
Really?
Really. It's a whole genre.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Alright.
What?
Nothing.
You look so confused.
Nothing. Swanee River doesn't doesn't sound very boogie woogie to me. But then again, I guess I don't really know what it is.
I'll tell you.
Okay.
I'll tell you. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about the history of rock and roll music, but first I'll tell you what boogie woogie is since I just asked you about it.
Okay.
Most historians believe that it was first played in Texas in the 1870s, but it was popular mainly in the 1920s among African American communities. Mm-hmm. It was mostly associated with dancing, and it is sometimes known as 8 to the bar because most of it is written using eighth notes.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the first boogie woogie hit was Pine Top's Boogie Woogie by Pine Top Smith.
Okay.
If you're wondering.
That stands to reason.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, now back to rock and roll. So besides boogie woogie, other influencing genres were gospel, jump blues, and country music. One factor that likely led to the development of rock and roll was the fact that African Americans moved to cities after slavery was abolished and blacks and whites were listening to each other's music for the first time in what was called a cultural collision.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. However, it is debated whether the new genre was a mix of black and white music or just a rebranding of the rhythm and blues music already played by African Americans.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, is that early rock and roll was basically just white people appropriating the musical styles of their black neighbors.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Many people actually believe that this helped pave the way to desegregation, so it was kind of like a way for blacks and whites to get together.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. The genres that transitioned right into rock and roll were rhythm and blues, which used to be called race music, and country music of the 1940s and 50s. In the 1940s, jazz music began to incorporate more horns, shouted lyrics, and boogie-woogie beats. But after World War II, large jazz bands weren't so economical, so they used smaller bands with guitars, bass, and drums.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chuck Berry was one of the pioneers of rock and roll and was the first artist to make the electric guitar the main instrument used, which is cool. And some of the other artists who were considered among the first rock and roll artists were Fats Domino, Jimmy Preston, and Bill Haley and the Comets.
Yep.
So the name rock and roll wasn't created until 1954, actually. It was popularized by a DJ in Cleveland, Ohio named Alan Freed. Two variations of rock and roll in the 1950s were called rockabilly and doo-wop. Rockabilly was mainly recorded by white artists like Elvis, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
Maybe you've heard of the idea that they were stealing songs from black artists, which is
I've heard that,
what
yes.
you were saying.
Yep.
So obviously you have.
Yes.
An example of this is when Hound Dog was recorded by Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton in 1952 and spent 14 weeks on the R&B charts, and was then recorded by Elvis in 1956 and became one of the best-selling singles of all time. Yeah, I know. Just inside, if you couldn't hear.
Oh, no, they could hear. I'm looking at the recording right now that came through.
Okay, yeah, it's ridiculous. Some more popular doo-wop songs at the time were The Great Pretender by the Platters and Yakety Yak by the Coasters. Most of the doo-wop groups were one-hit wonders, and later on, more white artists, especially Italian Americans, began to perform doo-wop, which I think I've heard. So, some say that in the mid-60s, rock and roll turned into just, quote, rock music, which is a broader category. Rock also incorporated other genres not heard in rock and roll, such as electric blues, folk, jazz, and classical. And since then, rock has become more and more diverse and has evolved into many subgenres, such as punk rock and progressive rock.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready for question 3?
Yep.
All right. It's everything else.
Okay.
So, the first Black Lives Matter street demonstrations occurred in 2014 after the deaths of 2 African Americans, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and what other man in New York City who was pronounced dead at the hospital after being held in a chokehold for 15 to 19 seconds by an NYPD officer.
Yeah, so...
This is current events.
Yeah, obviously it's current events.
Sorry, this is sad. I'm being a downer. I promise it gets more upbeat after this one.
Yeah, well, we went from Martin Luther King being assassinated to copyright theft.
I know.
Now this.
Sorry,
so.
It's getting better.
All right, so,
It will.
I mean, God, there have been so many black kids killed by cops. But
I know, but this is like a pretty
I think this.
big one.
I think I remember which one is which.
Okay.
Is it Trayvon Martin?
No.
No? Which one is it then?
Eric Garner.
Oh, Eric Garner. God damn it, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I started out your game 0 for 3 also.
Yep.
So, we're on track, I guess. All right, ready?
Mm-hmm.
Black Lives Matter is an international activist movement which campaigns against violence and racism towards black people. They drew inspiration from the civil rights movement, as well as the Black Power movement, the anti-apartheid movement, and Occupy Wall Street. It differs from the civil rights movement in that it is more group-centered rather than centered around one charismatic leader, like, with King and Al Sharpton or whoever.
Right.
So the movement began in the summer of 2013 after George Zimmerman was acquitted in the shooting and killing of Trayvon Martin.
That's right, yeah.
Eric Garner's death, which I spoke about in the question, has also been said to spark the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
Black Lives Matter was co-founded by 3 black community organizers named Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. Their first in-person protest was the Black Lives Matter Freedom Ride to Ferguson, Missouri after the shooting of Michael Brown. Over 500 participants showed up for the nonviolent demonstrations. Some other events that led to Black Lives Matter demonstrations were the shooting of Ezell Ford in LA, the shooting of Akai Gurley in New York City, and the shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice in Cleveland, which I did not even know about.
I remember that, yeah.
Horrible. Anyway, sorry, this is sad.
Yep.
Within 2 days, in July 2016, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were shot and killed by police officers. Alton Sterling was shot several times point blank while being held on the ground by Baton Rouge police officers. Philando Castile was shot in his car after he told the officer that he was licensed to carry a weapon and that he had one in the car. Horrible.
Yep.
After this, there were 112 protests in 88 American cities. This also led to the 2016 U.S. national anthem protests after NFL player Colin Kaepernick sat during the national anthem.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. The Black Lives Matter movement also focuses on embracing intersectionality. They say that, quote, Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of Black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. There are local Black Lives Matter chapters which have the same principles as the overall organization but operate without a central structure or hierarchy. And there are currently over 30 chapters in the US, England, Australia, Canada, and Ghana, which is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was international.
Yeah,
So,
that is cool.
yeah. And since the movement began, several other movements have sprung up, related, I guess. All Lives Matter has been supported by Senator Tim Scott and NFL player Richard Sherman. Professor David Goldberg said that All Lives Matter reflects a view of, quote, racial dismissal, ignoring, and denial. Basically, you know, they're just saying, like, Obama also said, like, in response to this, that, like, Black Lives Matter is not saying only Black Lives Matter, which I think people, this is getting very political. Sorry. Anyway, another movement that sprang up was Blue Lives Matter, which is a pro-police officer movement. And lastly, there was White Lives Matter, which was chanted by alt-right protesters during the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia.
God.
Anyway, according to a 2015 poll, almost 2/3 of African Americans agree with Black Lives Matter. Of the white people surveyed, 41% thought that Black Lives Matter advocated violence, and 59% said that it distracted attention from the real issues of racial discrimination. And lastly, a 2017 survey showed that 35% of whites and 83% of blacks have a favorable view of the movement. I guess in the U.S.
Yeah.
That is.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway. Hopefully this will cheer you up.
Okay.
I mean, it's not exactly a happy thing. It's neutral.
Mm.
All right. This one is science.
Okay.
Percy Lavon Julian was an African-American chemist who was a pioneer in the large-scale production of progesterone and testosterone. His work also helped allow the drug industry to produce cortisone. These three compounds are in what class of organic compounds which have 17 carbon atoms arranged in 4 fused carbon rings?
What? I have no idea.
You don't have a guess?
No.
Should I read the question again?
No.
It's basically just asking progesterone and testosterone and cortisone.
They're hormones, but that's not what you're asking for.
What type
you're
of
asking
hormone?
What type of hormone?
You can have one more guess.
I don't know.
Ugh, fine. Steroids. They're
Okay.
all steroids.
Okay.
I don't think that was that difficult.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, steroids are a class of organic compounds, meaning that they contain carbon. They have two main biological functions, which are as signaling molecules and as components of cell membranes that help change membrane fluidity. There are hundreds of different steroids, which are found in animals, plants, and fungi. And like I said in the question, they have 4 fused carbon rings. 3 of the rings are cyclohexane rings with 6 carbons each, and 1 ring is a cyclopentane ring with 5 carbons. And what makes each steroid different from each other is the functional groups that is attached to the 4 rings.
Mm.
Yeah. So one type of steroids are sterols, also known as steroid alcohols, which have a hydroxy group attached to one of the rings. The most well-known sterol is cholesterol, which you may have heard of.
Yep.
And it is a component of animal cell membranes and a precursor to steroid hormones, bile acid, and vitamin D. Cholesterol is also one of the main components of atherosclerotic plaques that cause the clogging of arteries, aka atherosclerosis.
Right.
Fungi have steroids called ergosterols, which maintain the integrity of their cell membranes. Many antifungal drugs negatively affect ergosterols in order to kill the pathogenic fungi.
Right. Okay.
Yep. And some plant steroids are steroidal alkaloids, cardiac glycosides, and phytosterols. Cardiac glycosides are most commonly found as secondary metabolites in plants, such as foxglove plants, which you may have heard of.
Mm-hmm.
These compounds increase the output force of the heart and its rate of contractions, and so they're important treatments used for congestive heart failure and cardiac arrhythmias.
Right. Okay.
So, like, even from, like, you know, hundreds of years ago, they were using the foxglove plant as a medicine that they realized could help with this.
Right. Cool.
Yeah. Phytosterols are basically like cholesterol in plants. Foods and dietary supplements with phytosterols have been marketed for decades, and although they lower LDL cholesterol, there is no evidence that they help with cardiovascular disease or overall mortality.
Okay.
That's like you see like those margarines and things that that are supposedly have that in it.
Right, because people assume that they're healthier than butter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they market it like it's going to help you with your heart, but it doesn't.
Okay.
In animals, there are three
Good.
types.
I'm just going to eat butter.
You're just going to eat butter?
Yeah.
Okay, me too.
Good.
Good plan. Okay. In animals, there are three types of steroid hormones. They are sex hormones, corticosteroids, and anabolic steroids. The three types of sex hormones are androgens, estrogens, and progestogens. Androgens regulate the development and maintenance of male characteristics, and estrogens do the same for female characteristics and the female reproductive system.
Right.
And lastly, progestogens are involved in the menstrual cycle and maintaining pregnancy, like progesterone.
Right.
The two types of natural corticosteroids are the glucocorticoids and the mineralocorticoids, both of which are made in the adrenal glands. Glucocorticoids are involved in glucose metabolism, and the main one is cortisol, which functions in immunosuppression. Mineralocorticoids influence salt and water balances in the body, and the main one is aldosterone, which regulates blood pressure. Most synthetic steroid drugs like prednisone and betamethasone are also corticosteroids. And lastly, anabolic steroids interact with androgen receptors to increase muscle and bone synthesis. There are both natural and synthetic anabolic steroids. The synthetic ones are the ones that are controversial in the sports world, which Justin knows a lot about. Not because he's taking steroids.
No, I wrote a paper about that, about the psychology of judgment of people who use steroids. Basically why people don't like them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Justin does psychology research.
Yes.
If you're wondering.
We mentioned that.
Did we? Anyway, it's interesting.
Episodes ago, yeah.
Steroids are interesting.
Yep.
But I didn't really get into that part of it.
No, there's a whole discussion to be had just on the history of anabolic steroids and their use in sport. Very interesting stuff.
Yeah, but that would be more sports and games question.
Yeah.
So maybe another time.
Maybe.
Ready?
Yep.
Sports and games.
Okay.
In 1957, Martin Luther King was awarded the Spingarn Medal by the NAACP. In 1976, what American baseball player who held the MLB record for career home runs for 33 years won the same award?
Career home runs. Hank Aaron.
Is that your final answer?
Yes.
Yes, it's Hank Aaron.
Okay.
Henry Louis Aaron was born on February 5th, 1934 in Mobile, Alabama to Herbert Aaron Sr. and Estella Aaron. He was one of 7 siblings, one of whom, named Tommy, also played Major League Baseball. His family was poor and couldn't afford to buy baseball equipment, so Hank would practice by hitting bottle caps with sticks. He batted cross-handed, meaning that he was a righty, but he placed his left hand on top of his right, which is pretty weird. It sounds very uncomfortable.
Oh, that's weird, yeah.
I think he eventually switched to being the typical batting stance, but I don't know.
Oh, that's really weird. I'm trying to do it, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right.
Huh.
When he was 15, he tried out for the Brooklyn Dodgers, but he didn't make the team. Then he decided to go back to high school. At the time, high schools didn't actually have their own baseball teams, so he joined the Mobile Black Bears, an independent Negro League team, for which he played outfield and third base. In 1951, at the age of 17, he signed a contract with the Indianapolis Clowns of the Negro American League. What a horrible name.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, isn't that stupid? I don't like it.
Yikes.
Yeah. After that, he got offers from 2 MLB teams, the New York Giants and the Boston Braves. He decided to play for the Braves because they offered him $50 more each month. They bought Aaron from the Clowns for $10,000 in 1952. It's kind of a shame that he didn't end up with the New York Giants because he could have played with Willie Mays and they would have been awesome.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
There's actually a quote in there from him saying, like, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
Anyway. He didn't immediately start playing for the Braves. He was assigned to their Northern League Class C farm team, the Eau Claire Bears. In case none of that sentence made sense to you, because it definitely didn't for me. A farm team is a team that provides experience and training to young players in hopes of bringing some of them onto the main team.
Right.
Class C was a defunct league, which consisted of the Northern League, California League, and Pioneer League. And the Eau Claire Bears were based in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, who were affiliated with the Boston Red Sox and Chicago Cubs before being affiliated with the Boston Braves when he played.
Right. So now it's what we call minor league baseball. So it's
right.
A, AA, AAA level.
Yeah, but I didn't know anything about these levels of minor league baseball.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Huh.
So anyway.
I grew up with, there was a minor league baseball team near where I grew up. The Orioles AA affiliate was near my hometown, so we would go to their games sometimes.
We had the Long Island Ducks.
Yeah.
And the Brooklyn Cyclone.
Surprised you didn't know this stuff then.
Yeah, I don't know. I went to like 2 Cyclones games. It was fun.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought about doing a discussion on minor league systems one day, but yeah.
I didn't really get into it that much.
Yeah, I might.
Okay. So in 1953, Aaron moved up to the Class A affiliate, the Jacksonville Braves. That season, he led the league in runs, hits, doubles, RBI, total bases, and batting average.
Wow.
Yeah. He was one of the first African Americans in this league, and he often couldn't stay with the rest of the team because of the Jim Crow laws.
Right.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. On March 14th, 1954, Aaron made his first spring training start on the Milwaukee Braves after Bobby Thompson fractured his ankle the previous day. In his first game, Aaron hit a home run. He then made his major league debut on April 13th and was hitless during that game. But he hit his first major league home run just 10 days later. In the next 122 games, he hit just 13 home runs before fracturing his ankle in September. After that, he changed his number to 44, which turned out to be lucky for him since he then hit 44 home runs in 4 different seasons.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, fun. In 1955, he hit 27 home runs and had 106 RBI and made the National League All-Star roster for the first time. In 1965, the Braves moved from Milwaukee to Atlanta, and in 1967, Aaron became the first Atlanta Braves player to hit his 500th career home run. On May 17, 1970, Aaron hit his 3,000th hit, and on April 27, 1971, he hit his 600th career home run. At the end of the 1973 season, he was just 1 home run short of tying Babe Ruth's record of 714.
Wow.
Yeah. During that offseason, he received a lot of death threats from people who didn't want him to break Babe Ruth's record, probably because of racism.
Yep.
Which is horrible.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. He actually tied the record on his very first hit of the next season, and on April 8, 1974, he hit number 715.
Awesome.
Yep. He hit his 755th and final home run on July 20th, 1976, which remained the home run record until Barry Bonds broke it in 2007.
Right.
Isn't that crazy? Like how long that it went on and on for so long. Like he was that good that
And there's a big old asterisk next to Barry Bonds' record anyway.
Exactly. Like
Speaking of steroids.
He was that really.
Yeah.
He was that good that
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. So anyway, that's a little more upbeat for you.
Yes.
Okay. Ready for question 6?
Yep.
Arts and literature. August Wilson, a popular African-American playwright, wrote 10 plays which are collectively known by what name after the place in which 9 of the plays are set. They are also known as the Century Cycle.
Chicago.
The other one was Chicago.
Great.
It's the Pittsburgh Cycle.
Okay.
The Pittsburgh Cycle, also known as the Century Cycle, takes place in Pittsburgh's Hill District, an African-American neighborhood. Each play is set in a different decade of the 20th century to show the Black experience throughout the century. August Wilson's goal was to use the plays as a medium to show whites a different way to look at African Americans. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of the plays. The first one in the cycle, called Gem of the Ocean, takes place in 1904 in Pittsburgh's Hill District. Mm-hmm. The play is about the 287-year-old Aunt Esther, who takes in 2 men named Solly Two Kings and Citizen Barlow. Everyone in his plays has very weird names. The story is about how Aunt Esther takes Citizen on a spiritual journey on the legendary slave ship called the Gem of the Ocean to the mythical city of Bones to teach him about his ancestors. They're all mythical and have some sort of sense of fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So he uses the fantasy elements to kind of portray, the African American experience.
It's like magical realism.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So the second play, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, is set in the 1910s in a boarding house run by a man named Seth Hallie. The play focuses on some of the boarders, including Harold Loomis and his daughter Zonia, who are looking for Loomis's wife. Loomis was previously kidnapped by Joe Turner and spent 7 years on his chain gang. In the play, Turner is meant to represent the evil of the Southern racist white man.
Mm-hmm.
So the third one is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. It's the one that's set in Chicago rather than Pittsburgh, and it takes place in the 1920s in a recording studio where Ma Rainey and her musicians gather to record a new album. There is tension throughout the play between the trumpeter Levy, who wants to have his own band, and Cutler and Toledo, who are music veterans. At the end, Levy is fired by Ma Rainey because he's causing problems, and in a rage, he fatally stabs Toledo.
Jeez.
This was one of the, I've seen 2 of these. This was one that I saw, and I've honestly never been so scared during a play as I was while sitting in the first row while he was flailing around holding a large knife. He was like going crazy, and he's like swinging around this.
It wasn't a real knife.
I know that, but like I knew that rationally, but like sitting in the first row, I was like, oh my god, someone's gonna get stabbed. I mean, someone did get stabbed, but it was part of the play. But
right.
I was a little concerned. Anyway, it was good. It was a really good play. So the other one I saw actually was the next one, which is in the 30s. It's called The Piano Lesson, back in Pittsburgh in 1936. It follows the lives of the Charles family and their piano, which has carvings made by one of their enslaved ancestors. The brother, Boy Willie, wants to sell the piano so that he can buy the land where their ancestors had struggled as slaves working for Sutter, who I guess was like the
slave owner.
Yeah. His sister, Bernice, wants to keep the piano because it has the carved images of their ancestors on it, and they know a little bit about the history, and so, it's important to her as an heirloom.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the end, it gets super weird, and Sutter's ghost comes, and then Bernice plays the piano, which summons her ancestors, and it kind of like drives him away, and then this whole thing freaks out her brother, who wants to sell it, and he's just like, forget it, and then he leaves.
Okay.
A lot of it's just like they're arguing, the 2 of them,
right? Yeah.
About it, and then the weird stuff happens. That one was weird. I liked it too, but I liked Ma Rainey's Black Bottom better.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the 5th play, 7 Guitars, focuses on 7 African American characters in 1948. It takes place during the funeral of one of the characters, showing flashbacks to the events leading up to the funeral. The main character is blues singer Floyd Schoolboy Barton, who is asked to sign a record deal after his song becomes an unexpected hit, but then he is mysteriously murdered. So basically his friends are at his funeral talking about like what they remember of him and trying to maybe figure out what happened.
Right, okay.
Yeah. The 6th play, Fences, which you may have heard of, it won a Pulitzer Prize and a Tony Award. It was also an Oscar movie recently. It's set in the 1950s. It's about Troy, a 53-year-old man who is struggling to provide for his family. At the end of the play, he becomes the first black truck driver in Pittsburgh, so that's uplifting.
Huh, cool.
Yeah. 2 Trains Running is the 7th play, which takes place in 1969 in Pittsburgh. It is about the social and psychological effects of the changing attitudes towards race from the perspective of urban blacks. Yeah. Jitney, the 8th play, is set in a gypsy cab station in Pittsburgh in 1977. It is about the drivers of jitneys, which were unofficial, unlicensed taxis in Pittsburgh.
Right.
In the 1970s, regular taxis wouldn't go to the Pittsburgh Hill District, so they had to have the jitneys instead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that actually was, I didn't write about this, but it premiered on Broadway last year, and it was the last of the 10 to be on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The 9th play, called King Hedley II, is set in Pittsburgh in 1985. It is about an ex-con who is trying to rebuild his life, and several of the characters in 7 Guitars make reappearances in that play.
Cool.
Yep. And lastly, the 10th and final play, Radio Golf, is about Harmond Wilkes, an Ivy League educated man, and his wife living in Pittsburgh in 1997. It is about their efforts to rebuild the Hill District, including high-rise buildings and high-end stores like Whole Foods and Starbucks. So it's pretty cool how, August Wilson kind of really captured like the decade in each one.
Yeah.
And
cool.
I would highly recommend go seeing these plays if you have an opportunity, because the 2 I saw were really good.
Cool.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a hard one.
Yes, that was a tough game.
We both started with a hard game.
I don't think mine was that hard, but okay.
I didn't think mine was that hard either.
Well, it was, because I only got one of them. So.
And yours was also, because I only got 2 of them.
This was the first instance in history of one of us only getting one answer.
I'm sorry, I thought you would get, a few of those. I don't know.
Okay.
We have a lot of time left in the season.
Yep.
And also, it's more fun when it's hard because then we and our listeners learn more.
Okay.
How about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
I'm trying to make you feel better. All right. So that's it for today. The score is now 2-1, which is basically meaningless. Maybe we'll have to write slightly easier games next time. So anyway, if you want to reach out to us, we are quizandhers@gmail. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter @quizandhers.
Yep.
We are on all podcast platforms, so, like, subscribe, review us.
Yep.
All that good stuff.
We're on YouTube now. Just search Quiz and Hers. You'll find it.
Right. Almost forgot.
Yep. If you, for some reason, want to watch your audio medium in a visual manner, you can do that.
Yeah, we have the little, what do you call it?
Audiograms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you want to watch that. I think that's it. Anything else?
Nope.
All right, so we'll be back next week.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
That was weird.